All right, cool. Sounds good. So I will officially go ahead and get this kicked off. I have a lot to cover in the next 45 minutes. I have 55 slides and I talk fast. So I'm going to try and go through these presentations as quickly as I can so that if people have questions on some of these things at the end, I can go ahead and cover them. So yeah, that's what my talk is about. Is talk about business email compromise and all of the fraud that's related to it, and why the BEC blame game has to stop. There's a lot of things that are going on right now that people don't realize that is related to BEC. So that's kind of what I'm going to shine light here on, is kind of walk through some of the things that are related. But first, who am I? My name is Ronnie Tokazowski. I'm a senior threat researcher here with the Guardians Asset Team. And what we do on the Asset Team is we pretty much respond back to attackers. So we'll, on a day-to-day basis, we'll engage back and forth with them. And if they say, "Are you on desk?" Yes, we're here in the office. We'll go ahead and we will try and get as much information out of them as I can. I'm also a hacker with things. Some of you guys may have seen me tweet under the handle Lightheart Malware. I tweet memes. I stream potato videos. I post a lot of memes. I do a lot of work on the BEC side, APT side. Also did work on crimeware back in the day, and I'm also an OSCP as well. So lots of fun doing offensive things like that. What I will be covering today, I will be talking about the current state of BEC, and I'll be talking about the 419 other BEC problems that you didn't really think were related to BEC, but are actually related to BEC, and why it's a lot more than just money that we're going to be talking about here. I'll be talking about what's also fueling the BEC ecosystem and some of the politics that are playing into this as well. And seriously, we need to start fixing this stuff because there's a lot of damage happening, and it's not just money going out, but it's also a lot of psychological damage too. Normally, with a lot of presentations, I glaze over hard topics. I try to make things as happy as I can. I post a lot of memes, but fair warning, there's a lot of uncomfortable things in this presentation. These are all true stories. These are things that I've seen over the years, and BEC and 419 fraud is not fun. It's not sexy, and the current state is bad. Again, we're going to be covering hard topics such as suicide, depression, death, psychological abuse, all these fun things that go into business email compromise and overlap. So let's go ahead and get this started. So the first problem of business email compromise is that it is currently a dumpster fire. And you maybe think, okay, that's just a metaphor to say that that's a problem. But no, I can mathematically prove to you that it's a dumpster fire. So when we look at the losses from IC3 for all of 2019, business email compromise, it's just BEC was responsible for $1.7 billion of fraud last year. Most of those statistics are out of the United States, just because that's how IC3 tracks it. But that does include some numbers outside the United States as well. And you're like, okay, $1.7 billion, is that really a big number? Well, when you actually start graphing that data and start looking at other information coming out of IC3, 40% of all cybercrime reported to IC3 in 2019 was BEC, period. Every dollar that they have referenced is a dollar that is directly related back to a victim. The other thing that's also overlaps with BEC is romance scams. You have spoofing, investment fraud, real estate scams, and a lot of other scams that overlap with these other forms of Nigerian fraud. That's a problem that's been going on for quite some time, but we're just now seeing it in the coming out targeting organizations on the BEC side. But we actually, again, take another look back at IC3's data. $26 billion as of September 10th, 2019 had been lost to BEC. And to put that into perspective, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be lost for different things like that. WannaCry was estimated to be $1.5 billion, if I remember right. And a lot of other types of cybercrime. You may have $100 million stolen here, $100 million stolen here for over 2 years. But it's something where there's a lot of financial damages that are happening on the BEC side. Lots of life that's being affected by this. And it's something we need to kind of start taking a look at. So let's go ahead and take a quick step back. What exactly is BEC? A lot of people have seen these before. It's usually an email where it says, hey, can you do a wire transfer for me? Are you on desk and you need to take care of a purchase order? Can you send me some gift cards? And all of these things are what would be constituted as business email compromise. It's where they usually target an organization to try and get them to wire money out to an account that they control. And it's like, okay, that's on the cuff. That's simple. That's a very simple problem, isn't it, right? Well, the 419 problems are that actually BEC also overlaps with 419 scams. A 419 scam is what most of us would remember as the Nigerian print schemes, where they're saying, hey, you have a long-lost relative in Nigeria, and I'm going to go ahead and send you $2.5 million, but you have to spend $1,000 in order to give me the money first. This was one of my favorite Fortnite. This was one of the first and early on quote unquote, attacks against the 419 scammer, and this was the Power Book. And what the Power Book was it was a person who was trying to sell a power book online and had a scammer that had contacted them. He knew they were a scammer, and what he did was he made this poorly configured computer out of a binder and just glued keyboards on it. So what he did was he had sent this to the scammer and he put nothing in it. And the way he made it work was he actually had customs. He made it to where customs was where the guy had to pay a lot of money from customs in order to get that money out, in order to get that quote unquote laptop that he thought he was getting. But it turns out it was just a binder with keyboards glued on it. So that was one of the first early times that I remember seeing somebody actually attacking back at 419 scammers. So once we start looking at 419 and BEC and all the things that overrelate or that interact with that, those lines really start to get blurry. So some of the things that we've seen that have been directly tied back to BEC, we have romance scams, wire fraud, lottery fraud, account takeovers, and phishing kits are two things that we've also seen related to this. We've also seen Craigslist scams, check fraud, mystery shopper scams. Drug trafficking has also been looped in with this as well. There's been cases where romance victims have been used as socially engineered to traffic drugs into certain countries for people, thinking it's chemicals that they're bringing in. We've seen a ton of W-2 scams, work from home scams, and document forgeries. Some of the other things we've also seen on the BEC side, some actors like to dabble in Fools for the Dead. That's where they will go ahead and get a whole listing of people who are deceased, and then they will use that information in order to try and file for loans and other things like that, and just in order to steal the identity of someone who had passed away. Vendor email compromise also gets into that identity theft. We've also seen actors doing that, and there's about 419 other crimes that I have forgotten to include in this list, but there is a lot of overlapping things with this. So once we go ahead and start looking at that, now that we know that all of those things are related, what are the harder questions that we need to ask? We need to okay, what are some of the other flavors of business email compromise? How do BEC actors actually get accounts? And what are the other crimes that are related to it? Is there something where culture plays into this? And the scariest question of all, and this is the one that keeps me up most nights, is what don't we know about BEC? It's like there's enough information to know that it's an absolute mess and a dumpster fire right now. But what are the things that we don't know? Because the things we knew right now, the things we know now about BEC were completely different years ago. So it's just so many things are overlapping that it is a really big problem. The second problem of BEC is vendor email compromise. This was where we saw one actor that we named Silent Starling. And what they would do is they would use account takeovers in order to play man in the mailbox. And what they would do is they would do one of two things. They would either set up an email forward rule and siphon off the emails from that victim's inbox, or they would go ahead and actually use the password to log back into the account. Most of the time it was an email forward rule, but again, it's just something where once they get access by a phishing kit, that's when they'll sit and watch and wait and look for a place where they can go ahead and attack somebody else with that information. Usually they'll wait for an invoice and say, okay, here's the actual updated invoice. Here's the new bank account information, wire it to this account, but not the actual account. One of the things that we did see with Silent Starling was they had compromised 39 employees at a U.S. company. There was 5 campaigns for over a several-month period. We also saw them compromise 13 email accounts within about 30 minutes in a February 2019 campaign. And again, that was all done through phishing kits. And you maybe look at me like, wait, phishing kits, account takeover, BEC, Ronnie, that is no related. It's like, yeah, this is related to BEC. And the way that we saw that, and you may think, okay, this is an isolated event, Silent Starling, whatever, they were just one group doing that. But that's not the case. We also saw another group doing it too. One of the things that we saw with this second group was they had captured 38 different unique URLs that they were using for separate phishing campaigns. This specific group was involved in Craigslist scams and check fraud, gift card scams, payroll diversion, advanced fee fraud, mystery shopper scams. They were doing FAFSA fraud, unemployment bank, unemployment fraud, and a bunch of other things. And again, this was all one group that was doing that. Completely different from Silent Starling. And this is a group that we named as Scatter Canary. This group was very interesting because they were actually one of our first case studies into how BEC and 419 scams overlap. So what we found of the analysis of Scattered Canary, we have we were able to gain over a 10-year picture into how this group grew out of doing Craigslist scams to check fraud to romance scams into doing what we would consider or what we define now as business email compromise. Um, and that's why we call them kind of the canaries, because they were our first canary into this ecosystem in order to be able to see that. Their targeting was also extremely scattered, and that's where we get the scattered name from it. And it's interesting because when we started investigating this group, we realized that we went into it knowing they were just a BEC group, but it turns out that, again, they were involved in so many other things. Again, a lot of what we would consider today as 419 scams, this is the roots of the group now. And they're also doing a lot of these things too. I've had cases where I'm looking at instances of Scattered Canary right now, and again, doing so many other different types of crime. It's crazy. And also, speaking of Scattered Canary and the scattered Canary, they're also very quick to change to new methods of stealing money. So one of the most recent cases of Scattered Canary was as early as April, or was as late as April, as recent as yesterday, as a matter of fact. And what they were doing is they started filing for unemployment funds. And here in the United States, we're being hit by COVID as well, and the government has released funds that the United States citizens can apply for in order to get money back. So what Scattered Canary did was they took that as a great opportunity to say, hey, let's go steal some of that money. So what they're doing is they're loading green dot cards with some of the funds, and they're moving the money back and forth between different places. And it's kind of a big deal with how they're doing that. And you're like, okay, whatever. It's not really that big of a deal. But hundreds of millions of dollars lost in Washington state to unemployment fraud, and knowing that this unemployment stuff has only been going for like a short period of time, hundreds of millions of dollars, short period of time, that's kind of a big deal. And again, this group has been running scams for more than a decade. And again, this is just out of Washington state that we know that all these numbers have been made public at this point. And when we actually look and have looked at the other things that Scattered Canary has done, we know of at least 10 other states that they have hit as well. Indiana I actually added this, I think it was Sunday, I added Indiana to the list because guess what? Scattered Canary is now going after Indiana as well. And we know of Hawaii, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Mexico, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Washington, and now Indiana, that the actors behind Scattered Canary have gone after. But there is good news to hundreds of millions of dollars being lost. Hundreds of million dollars have been returned. And there was news that broke out on the 28th that that the state of Washington had successfully recovered $300 million in fraudulent unemployment funds. The cool thing is that we are working very closely with law enforcement on Scattered Canary. We're passing them all the information over that we have on the actors. We're working extremely closely with them to try and give them the information in order to help stop a lot of this fraud. I can't go more into it right now, but again, this chapter is not over yet. This is something that's very active, and there's more to be continued on that. So collaborate with law enforcement. Good things come from that. The third problem of business email compromise is actual check fraud. And usually when you say check fraud, most people will think of like, hey, you received a fake check. But no, that's the problem with Exaggerated Lion, was they would actually use and target organizations and say, hey, I need you to go ahead and file a check, send this over to this one vendor for me, where that vendor is actually a romance victim. Exaggerated Lion like to use a multi-tiered level of romance victims in order to launder the monies for them. We're aware of one romance victim that had laundered over $100,000 for the scammer. And I'll be covering romance scams. I'm going to be coming back to this specific case interview. But just know that the check fraud that's also happening on BEC is not just fake checks, it's also actual checks. And speaking of fake checks, that's also another thing, problem number 4 of BEC. Fake checks can also be used for products or services. Most of the time, we see them in the advanced free fraud side of things, non-delivery schemes, where someone says, hey, I want to buy this thing on Craigslist. Go ahead and I'm going to send you 2.5 times the amount of money. You go ahead and send this money to this courier, email me, or go ahead and send the money to this person and send me the product. And it turns out that person gets stuck with a fake check. They end up out a couple $1,000s and they're out whatever they were trying to sell. Most of the time we see this, it's usually Craigslist that they'll do this. We've seen them target Depop and other person-to-person product websites. So if there's anything where you can go ahead and exchange this piece of information or this product for money, those are places that we have seen the actors go. Again, usually the asking price is for hundreds of dollars over what they're trying to say, and by the end of it, after the money and everything gets shipped, you're pretty much out of that. The other place that we've seen this stuff happening is mystery shopper scams. And again, the way it usually works is that mystery shoppers will go and usually go to a restaurant in order to fill out different pieces of information about what the restaurant was like and everything. So was it a good restaurant? Was the food good? How was the service? That's usually what a mystery shopper does. Um, so one of the things that they will do is they'll also create fake websites to ask for mystery shopper information. And you just straight up put your first name, your last name, and your address. And once they have your information, they'll be like, okay, you're cool. Here's all the information for you, where you're doing mystery shopper. Here's your check for $1,600. Now go ahead and go cash the check, go to this restaurant and send me the money. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to recruit that person as a mule in order to continue siphoning funds out of that. The other problem with a lot of this stuff is when it comes to fighting BEC, there is no centralized area to report this stuff. And you would think, okay, well, just report it to your local police department, just report it to the FBI, everything's good to go. But that's another problem is there's also data gaps. So we had one case where one of our actors where we had over 160 checks in 30 states for a lot of the victims. And again, that financial loss was something where the potential loss would have been over $10,000, which is what the FBI usually looks for. But again, you now have 30 states. A lot of those totals don't necessarily hit that 10K mark. And now you have to try and contact either 30 different FBI agents or 30 different places and local PDs. That gets to be a mess. So unfortunately, there's just no good centralized area to report a lot of this fraud. The other place that we've seen them targeting victims is not just in mystery shopper scams, but we've also seen different actors targeting escorts. And this was one of those cases where they were trying to target escorts in Washington, D.C. and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and send you this money. Go ahead and cash the check and send me the money. And again, if you think about it, this is probably one of those type of schemes where your victim is not going to report. Your victim is probably not going to report the crime because what they're doing is technically illegal. So it's depending on the jurisdiction where they are. And it's something where the unreported crime, that is also a very big problem with this. Oh, and as we're speaking of crimes that don't go reported, let's start talking about romance scams. One of the things that a lot of actors need in order to move money is they need accounts, they need infrastructure, they need something built up, and they need some level of trust in order to go ahead and try and send money back and forth between people. BEC actors and 419 actors make heavy use of romance victims. And what they'll do is they will use them as unwitting mules in order to go ahead and move money. And what they will do is they will go ahead and tell the victim one story, which is completely different than the actual story, and to say, "Hey, you're moving money because of my inheritance. That's why I'm moving the money. Here's a picture of me." And the problem is the amount of psychological abuse that I've seen on the romance site is absolutely devastating. It's absolutely mind-boggling how far these scammers will go with some of those victims in order to manipulate them. And I'll be covering some of those stories here shortly. So the way that this works, again, your actor will build a profile in order to engage with potential victims. Once they build that trust, that's how they'll go ahead and continue to use the victims. And usually with a lot of victims, they actually think that they're in a relationship. And that's a problem, is that for a lot of people who get pulled into this, they may not necessarily be the type of people who are able to see the difference between a scam. They may not see the difference and be able to know what a image that's photoshopped or anything. A lot of those people just don't have that knowledge to understand it. And the closest analogy I've been able to think of to actually convey this is that as we all go through life, we gain different knowledge. And it's something where romance victims, they were able to be successful in life through gaining one set of knowledge. And for us as security researchers, we gain a different set of knowledge. And we're the experts in security. We're the experts who can identify a lot of the scams. So it's something, but again, if I'm a mechanic or if I'm a horrible person at working on a car. So I bring my car to a mechanic. And just because I have to bring my car to a mechanic, that doesn't mean that I'm less of a person for not being able to work in my car. And likewise, it doesn't make these romance victims less of a person because they don't have the knowledge of a researcher. It's just something where we all need to understand that this is part of this, and there's a lot more avenues on the psychological side to play into this. So, and you're maybe thinking, okay, romance scams, fake checks, BEC. Come on, Ronnie, you were absolutely insane. You've been drinking way too much of the wonderful vodka. It's like, no, that is seriously how this stuff works. I've got facts and evidence and correspondence and intelligence to back every single claim on here. And some of the things that we've seen, again, Craigslist scams to send fake checks to work from home victims. We've seen romance victims targeted based on singles farmers dating. We've seen that actors using accounts of Ashley Madison. We've seen BDSM dating websites. We've seen we've seen Christian Mingle. We've seen the entire gamut of romance victims targeted on this stuff. And we've also seen them doing tax fraud. And all of those things I just described was literally the same actor, the same inbox, the same account, all of the same things. And again, if it's something where if you're really questioning, okay, these things aren't related, it's like a single point of reference to say, yes, all of these things are related. The way that actors will socially engineer their romance victims is they use what's called romance scripts, or formats is another word. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Larry, who is single and divorced. He's 62 with 3, 2, and 3 kids. And again, what the actors will do is they will use these scripts and formats, which is a body of text that they can use to copy and paste back and forth to their victim. Many of these scripts and formats that they use are very loving. So they may say, I am widowed. I'm looking for somebody to spend the rest of my life with, and they can just copy paste it back to the victims without even thinking about it. We've seen some of these cases where the scripts will go 28 and 30 layers deep, and in some cases they actually have quote unquote debugging information, if you will, where they can say, okay, if your victim gets upset or starts questioning, here's how you reassure them. So they actually have debugging routines in these scripts for the psychology of, okay, if your person is skeptical of this, here's how you get around that. But again, we've seen so many different types of these, and these are unfortunately a dime a dozen. So it's something where anybody can get into this game. And again, this isn't just a U.S. problem. We also saw one of our actors targeting a romance victim in Latvia. And again, I realized here, this is one of the quotes from there. I realized that a Latvian women are the best in the world when it comes to love, care, and honesty. And again, this is all the stuff that your victim is telling back to that your scammer is telling your victim. So now your victim is hearing this, and now they're having these positive words that are being told to them. So again, it's that positive reinforcement that and for them, they actually think what they're doing isn't wrong, and many of them actually think they think they're in a relationship. So remember that screenshot of that check I showed earlier? That was it was $16,000, $16,600. So this was one of those cases where the BEC actor had convinced an organization to send a check to somebody else as for a vendor payment. So that vendor that they had just so happened to be a romance victim. So what they did was throughout the correspondence back and forth with from the victim to the scammer had told the person, said, hey, I want you to go ahead and cash this check. This is for my inheritance. And I'm just trying to get this money from here in order to come so we can live happily ever after. And the actor and the victim, or the actor was sending pictures of herself back and forth to the victim. The victim was sending other pictures too. He was sending pictures such as pictures of his food, pictures of himself, things that I would normally send my wife, or that I would normally post on Twitter and say, hey, I cooked this piece of food. Do y'all want to see want to see a picture of this piece of food? So once this victim had gotten the check, the scammer had told them to go ahead and deposit the check in order to cash it, in order to wait for the check to clear. And again, this entire process, the bank was never really able to see that this was a problem because the check was real, the money that was real, the company that was real. And again, they were just using the romance victim as that middleman in order to kind of facilitate the stuff out. Initially, the actor wanted the money to be sent via Bitcoin using a Bitcoin ATM. And unfortunately, the ATM that was close to the victim was about 2.5 hours away down in Houston, Texas. And he was like, I don't have enough gas for my car. I can't get down there. My truck doesn't work really well. So that's when the actor was like, okay, go ahead and just put $15,000 cash into the FedEx box. Don't worry about the insurance. Just put it into a FedEx box and send it. And again, the victim was like, okay. And the victim sent $15,000 cash in a FedEx box to Rogers, Arkansas, from Beaumont, Texas, to a completely different romance victim. And again, that's where we lost track of it because again, that's cash that is now gone. And again, that was a group that we also know as Exaggerated Lying. We've also got information about this group too if y'all want to check it out on our website. So some other victims that we've gotten to see, we've also seen information of foreclosed homes. This was from another victim that we saw where she was like, hey, I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars through this. I don't know what to do. You accuse me of stealing money from you. That's not the case. If anything, you've stolen money from me and everything. And after that last response, the actor had responded back and said, oh, Happy New Year. I got your email, but the simple conclusion is you can't get the loan. I guess that's it. I guess we can't work together. And that was pretty much the actor's attitude on that. So once we started digging into that, it was June of 2019. We found information. We had looked up the address, and it turns out that that person had to foreclose on their home, move out, and from there, I don't know what happened. And you may be looking at me like, okay, what does an auctioned home, a foreclosed home, and a romance victim of BEC have? Again, no relationship. Again, there is a relationship. As of 2015, that victim was in the scheme for about 3 years, and again, they lost $300,000. The last communication was 12/31/18. And again, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that they had lost in. Your actor, who we were looking at, was registering a scrap.io account, which is used for lead generation on the 14th of January in 2019. They registered for a CEO related to private email account with Namecheap, and then they started sending BEC account BEC attacks asking for gift cards on the 31st of December. Again, here's a screenshot of one of the attacks that the actor was trying to use. Are you available to run an errand? I can't take a call. I'm in a meeting. Same account. All this information from that romance victim who they were engaging with in order to steal money from was in the same account as this BEC actor. And again, this is something where I've seen actual death as related to this stuff too. So this one was a really, really unique case where the only information that we had was the passwords that the woman had been using in order to engage back and forth with the attackers. So initially, you could tell that this was going to be a romance victim, where it started off as "Forever love you, strong for you, we are forever in two hearts, one love." And eventually, as time went on, you could kind of see that even in the passwords, she started to become tired and worn down because of this. And again, her passwords started becoming things like too tired for this and too much mystery. The last communication that we have in referencing to this victim was that they had received they had all of her information that they needed in order to cash out her retirement fund, her IRA account. And again, we don't have information to support that they had cashed out of it, but they had all the information they needed anyway. And this is the story of Jane, where unfortunately, after that money she had sent that information, Jane had passed away a month later. So looking at Jane's obituary, it turns out that she was a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids. She loved spending time with the grandkids. Husband was out of the picture. I think he had either passed away. I think he had passed away. I was under the impression they had gotten divorced or anything. And for her, the kids were a loving part of her lives, and she absolutely loved spending time with the grandkids. And that for me, that hits a little bit home because my wife is very much a stay-at-home mom too, and she helps take care of the kids. We homeschool. So seeing this, it really kind of struck a nerve. And it was something where for Jane, it wasn't necessarily that she was doing wrong. It was just she wanted to be loved. She was used to having all of the kids home, and now they weren't. They were up and gone, and she was alone. And she ended up on the wrong side of the scam. Again, that after Jane had passed away, that's not the complete end of her story. The scammers actually took her information in order to go ahead and start filing for auto loans. So a month after she died, they went ahead and started using her information to file for car loans. Vroom, vroom. And again, here's some other things that actors have done to victims. Suicide attempt, hey, can you cash this check for me? So we had another case where we were looking at a romance victim who was purchasing gift cards for the actor. And her case was really interesting because she was very paranoid and delusional based on everything that was going on. And the reason she was paranoid was because she thought somebody was watching her every information. And anytime she would get anxious, her lover that she was engaged with, aka the scammer, would have somebody from the CIA talk to her in order to kind of help calm her down. What it turns out is that person with the CIA was actually another account the scammer had created for her, so that the scammer was talking back and forth with them on both accounts. And at some point, she eventually stopped talking to the scammers because she attempted to commit suicide. And she came back to the scammer and she was talking and she's like, she's like, I lost it. I tried to kill myself. My mom had me committed and they found out everything about you online. And for her perspective, she had told them everything that she thought was going on. But that's the problem is what a lot of these victims actually think is going on is completely different. And that's very much the case where we saw with the actor who, or with the victim who had cashed the $16,000 check. He thought that that check wasn't a check. He didn't think that that was a fake check. He thought that was a legitimate check for the girlfriend's inheritance, and that's the story that the scammer was telling him. And he was like, "Okay, I'm cashing this for your inheritance." And once this victim who attempted to commit suicide told the actor that she lost it and tried to kill herself, the actor replied back with a picture of himself and said, "You know, I'm always here for you. I am always me." And again, a week later, he was trying to recruit this person back into filing for fake checks and cashing fake checks for the scammer. So that's the level that a lot of these scammers will go is that they see a lot of these victims as being disposable. And for a lot of the cases like this, your scammer will go to any means whatsoever in order to make a dollar. Problem number 6 of BEC, gift card fraud. One of the things that actors will use in order to do this is they'll ask it for different types of rewards for the employees. They'll ask for pictures sent by email. Sometimes they'll ask for a cell phone number. And once they get that information, that's where they'll start engaging with you in order to use the cards. Once they have the gift cards, they'll usually use gift card or they'll use Bitcoin exchanges in order to convert the information from the gift cards to Bitcoin and back and forth. Paxful is very much one of the main places that they really like to use for this. And what they'll do is again they can take the gift cards and sell them directly to Bitcoin. And the quote unquote great thing for a lot of the actors here is they're able to completely bypass the standard banking process. They're completely able to bypass all those mechanisms. So they don't have to run a romance victim. They don't have to worry about that person telling the cops. They don't have to worry about other fraud popping up. They can just be like, hey, send me a gift card. I got Bitcoin. I'm done. And one of the things that a lot of these actors will use Bitcoin for is some of them will actually use it for infrastructure. So they're starting to get creative now, and they will actually, again, use those funds that they've watered from gift cards in order to create domains. And there's a lot of registrars out there now that will let you use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in order to pay for your infrastructure, which is a great and wonderful problem that we have coming up now because it's going to be even more difficult to track these guys. I mean, not like it's already hard and difficult already. So problems number 7 through N is one of the biggest problems of all, in my opinion, is the data gaps. And again, it's something where we know after fighting BEC for the last 5 years, after putting my malware hat up on the shelf for several years, this is the biggest problem right now with business email compromise, is that we don't know what we don't know. But the things that we do know is victims they don't want to talk about this. They're a victim. They have been exploited for years. The amount of psychological abuse and the damage that has gone into these is horrible. You have crimes that aren't always tracked into the 419 bucket of doing regular traditional Nigerian fraud. But again, all of this is related because it's the same actors doing the same thing. BEC is just so happens to be the one instance that we saw where they branched out and started targeting private companies and organizations, and that's why it's now a problem. But the other thing is this has been going on for decades, where a lot of Nigerians and a lot of Nigerian organized crime groups have been stealing money like this. The other problem is, let's say, like going back to the 163 check problem. You have 160 checks in 30 states. How do you track that? Who do you report that to? Trying to actually get an arrest based on that, and all those people who are involved in that is a pain. The other thing too, again, going back to the escorts, not all of these crimes are getting reported, and that's the problem. Is that a lot of it will kind of die at your local PD level, and it won't go up to the federal side because your local PDs are more interested in working local crimes as opposed to the cyber crimes. And we've learned a lot over these 5 years of fighting BEC, but again, there's a lot of things that we don't know. And it's that gap and those things that we don't know that scares the crap out of me. And that's what keeps me up at night, is knowing that we see a lot of really bad stuff. We see victims who have attempted to commit suicide. We've seen people who have lost their homes. We've seen people who have lost their complete livelihoods. And this is just what we see. We don't know what else is missing out there. That's the scariest part. Other facts that we know about BEC is this, again, this is problem number 8. BEC is 40% of all cybercrime reported to IC3 in 2019, period. If you want to go and look at the numbers, if you want to try and debunk me on it, if you want to try and argue that BEC is not a problem with everything, I encourage you to go take a look at the IC3 numbers. And again, for all of 2019, that's the numbers, 40%. Crunch the numbers, happy to have that discussion. When we actually start looking at the other crimes that BEC overlaps with, that number, that reported fraud to IC3 quickly jumps up to 70%. Again, spoofing, the account takeovers, and all of those other things are also related to it. And again, $26 billion in losses, and and not to mention the tons of emotional damage, the death, the suicide, lost homes, lost mortgages, and again, that's just what we know. So that's a lot of the problem that we know right now. But again, BEC is not just a US problem. It's not just a Poland problem. It's something where we're all working through this. And believe it or not, that Nigeria also has problems too. And it's something where in order to actually effectively combat this, you have to understand the problems that Nigeria is facing and what's pushing this stuff forward in order to actually be able to start making a difference in this stuff. So problem number 9. Rappers in Nigeria sing praises of fraud. Yahoo Boys, aka a lot of the Nigerian fraudsters who are involved with this stuff, they're seen as doing a really, really good for the economy. Naira Marley, who was one rapper, he actually did a webcast and said the Yahoo Boys were great for the economy, and the fans were obviously pissed because what they were saying was people who were doing fraud. Because what he was saying was people who were doing fraud are actually good for the Nigerian economy. Let them keep doing the things that they are. So what he did was and the fans were obviously pissed on that. A couple months later, he created a song that mocked law enforcement. And after he created the song, the day after he had released it, he was arrested for, wait for it, wire fraud. And it turns out that there's a direct correlation between the rappers in Nigeria who are singing about wire fraud and Yahoo Boys and actually being either part of that ecosystem or having friends who were in there. But contrary to popular belief, not all Nigerians are scammers, and a lot of the local Nigerians absolutely despise the name that a lot of these scammers have given to their country. And a lot of them are trying to fight back, and they want to have the scammers not be giving them the bad name. And again, a lot of Nigeria absolutely hates these people because, again, they understand that a lot of these scammers have blood on their hands based on grandmothers who committed suicide, based on this person who completely had their livelihood taken away. And a lot of your local Nigerians understand that. And that's what they're trying to do is they don't like that perception that they have. The problem is there's a lot of corruption in Nigeria as well. And again, this is something where it's not just your local people who are corrupt. This goes all the way up to the top. So if you do a Google search for police and government corruption in Nigeria, you'll see tons of problems in there. And to give you an idea of some of the problems that Nigerians have to deal with, there was one case where where a cop came into a cab for a cab driver and essentially asked the cab driver for $10, or $10 converted 10 to 10 US dollars. The driver didn't have money to give, so what the cop did was he shot the driver. And then what the cop also did was he shot the driver's pregnant wife, who was in the back seat, in the head. And there's a source of the video if you want to go ahead and see some information about that actual story and what happened. There's no gory details, but again, it walks through and it will show you some of the levels of corruption that a lot of these actors go into. It goes to show how much corruption is in Nigeria that a lot of these local people have to deal with. The other thing, you also have actors musicians who come out against wire fraud. Falls is one of the great examples. And what he did was when Nice, who's another rapper, came out with the song "Living Things," which was praising wire fraud. It was praising Western Union transfers. It was praising a bunch of money laundering like that. Falls came out and said, "No, you cannot say that. It's like this is a problem. People are having money stolen from them, and we can't be worshiping them. We can't be saying that wire is a good thing." So the other thing is that in Nigeria, the market is not the best for graduates. So it's not really the easiest money in order to survive there. And there's few jobs for actors, or few jobs for a lot of the graduates. And we had one case where the quote unquote actor spent 16 months applying for a job, applied for work visas outside of the country, tried to actually get out of Nigeria, couldn't find a job, and ended up becoming a scammer because there was no other way for him to make money. And again, not all Nigerians are scammers. And again, the yearly salary being 3,000 US dollars and a lot of poverty, you have to really kind of think about this and say, okay, I can either be a scammer and I can make a lot of money, have a really good life for me and my family, or I can go and bust my butt and do an honest day's work and not get a lot of money. And this is the decision a lot of Nigerians are faced with, is trying to figure out, okay, do I go commit crime, have a good life, or do I have a hard life and not make as much money? So that's something that a lot of people have to come up with. And again, starting to wrap this up here, problems number 13 through 419. Again, things I haven't covered. I haven't covered human trafficking. I haven't covered the drug trafficking. I've touched on money laundering, but again, this is something where there are so many other things that are related to this BEC mess that all of it is connected. Every piece of it overlaps in some way, shape, or form. And when I say overlap, I'm not talking about, oh, this tangential thing over here is related. No, I mean same actors, same accounts, same crimes, doing 16 other things in that one account. Again, this is how all of the cases that we've seen happen. As we've been investigating BEC, it's like, again, these actors are not involved in just one type of crime. They're involved in multiple types of crime. And seriously, it's an absolute mess trying to fight this stuff because of all the overlaps. The other thing is the failure in fighting BEC is the stigma that goes along with it. I feel like my last 5 years has been trying to convince the world that the simplest crime is actually one of the ones that's causing the most problems and most damage. It's like I've got all the numbers to support and prove that, but that's 90% of what I have to do on any given day is convince people that BEC is a problem. And again, most people kind of chalk a Nigeria problem to, oh, it's easy, it's low tech, it's unimportant. But you may feel that way, but looking at the numbers, it's what's causing the most damage, period. No questions, period. I mean, it's numbers support it. Can't argue with numbers, can't argue with the losses. The stigma of romance victims losing money is like, oh, they're just stupid users. But again, it kind of goes back to that idea that as we go through life, we have different knowledge. That person who's a romance victim was able to get through their life and able to live a successful life with with little problems, but they just kind of end up on the wrong side of this. And just because you don't know how to build a car, just because you may not need to know how to build an engine, just because I know how to tow a fishing lure and you don't, it's something where that doesn't make me better than you. That doesn't mean that romance victim is more or less smart or stupid than any of us here. The main root of the problem is that we all have different knowledge, and just because we have different knowledge, that does not mean that we're stupid. The other thing, reason of failure in fighting a lot of BEC is the psychology that goes along with it. Again, we're the weird ones. We're the ones that need a little patience on this. And it's something where we need to understand that there's a lot more going on with this than just the people asking for money. Again, your actors are saying the right things in the right words, and if someone is going and actually looking for a relationship, they're more likely going to be susceptible to that because they're intentionally going out looking for that. And again, a lot of victims get hooked, and one of the messages I've seen back with multiple romance victims is they get worn down, and your actor will just constantly badger that person until they finally do it. And again, how do you fight an enemy who specializes in psychological hacking, of manipulating people to do stuff that they want them to? Again, that's some of the stuff that we have to understand too. Is this is just the nature of the beast? There's a lot of psychological damage on that. Failures in BEC collaboration. We made a lot of headway over the last couple of years, but again, it's massive and it needs to be treated as such. This is international crime that touches 75% of the globe, and it's something where we have seen victims everywhere. This is not just a U.S. problem. This is happening everywhere. We need more people talking about it. Again, there's a lot that we don't know about BEC, and likewise, there's even more that we don't know that we don't know. And if it's an easy and simple problem, and if BEC is so simple and easy in order to fix, why don't we actually try and fix it? This is where the losses are. This is where all the money is going out. And again, this is a big problem. We need to start thinking about this. And the approach that we've been taking on the BEC side, that's something where this has been helpful, is that we need to go ahead and it's just like eating an elephant. You have to eat an elephant one bite at a time, and it'll take you forever to eat that elephant. But if you eat it one bite at a time with a lot of friends, then you'll eventually be able to eat that BEC elephant. And it's something where we need to stop being a statistic. And this is how long I've been fighting BEC. I put $5 billion in the first slide, and I have updated this over the last 5 years. So now I'm 26 plus $3.7 billion of BEC fraud fighting this everything. We need to start fixing things, and we need to start thinking differently. And we need to actually start trying to understand what's going on, and we need to think outside the box here, because the approaches that we're doing on some of this stuff, some of it's helpful, some of it isn't, but we need to start understanding that there are so many other avenues to the stuff that we need to start addressing it sooner rather than later, because it's just going to continue to be a problem. And again, 40% of all of BEC losses in 2019, 40% of all losses in cybercrime reported to IC3 were BEC related. Again, when you look at the other Nigerian fraud that relates to that, that number jumps to 70%. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of damage, and we really need to start figuring this out. So with that, I'm going to officially turn it over. So if you have any questions, feel free.